2, 3. All right. Welcome everybody for our final installment of our 2020 virtual class sessions. Cheers to everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Carol, Jen, and I were just extremely excited with the turnout in such a short time to put this all together. Again, we love doing these champagne classes at this time of the year, considering everything that's been happening. It's just fitting to end the whole semester with champagne. Joining us tonight is Jen from Slocm&Sons. Give her a round of applause. She can't hear you. You're all on mute. There you go. Jen comes to us with a wealth of knowledge, just not on champagne itself, but everything. She's one of our key salespeople down at Wine 101. We enjoy having her do these classes with us. She's done everything from Lambrusco to cocktails to rosé classes, everything in between. It's just a pleasure to have her when she comes in, and she knows our sweet spot, how to really get to us. She walks in the door with a bag full of bubbles and it just melts our hearts. So with tonight talking about champagne and doing something, she wanted to feature Laurent-Perrier, and said absolutely, big fan of it ourselves. And Jen's got some great travel stories. She went over there, and it's just a great time sipping champagne with Jen. Carol's with us tonight, and you all. So Jen, take it away. Thank you for joining us on a really special night, nice snowy night here in Connecticut, sipping away some fine bubbles.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you to Chris and Carol for having me and helping to put together this whole event. I am a huge champagne fan, but Laurent-Perrier is my favorite house. So it's a huge treat for me to talk about them because I feel like they don't get featured as frequently, and the stories behind them are just fabulous, and so are all the people and of course the wines. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to talk a little bit about the house itself, some of the history, how they got to be where they are now. Then we're going to get into the individualized wines, how they're produced, profiles, what makes them a little bit different. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. Have any questions, write them down, or you're welcome to write them down in the notes, and then we'll circle back at the end and kind of do it all that way. So give me one moment.
There's also the chat box. So if you have questions, you want me to address them with Jen, if she can't see them while she's doing the presentation, throw them into the chat group box, and I'll bring it up to Jen as soon as we get a second. All right. There we go. Like I said in the email, there are no specific pairings for tonight, so everything should complement what we're tasting, whether it's the olives, the cheese, and everything else I put in there. Try a little bit of everything. See what works for you. Again, this was not intended to be a pairing thing, but it shows you the versatility of champagne with many different kinds of foods. And like I said in the email sent home to you this morning, I use champagnes as much as I use a still wine. I use it for pairings for everything that we cook at home when we go out to dinner. It's one of my preferred drinks to pour for anything. I think bubbles and food go hand in hand, and we always encourage people to drink more bubbles and really try to seek out different pairings with them.
I wholeheartedly agree. To speak to that fact before we jump in, we have 2 bottles open in the house right now, and my husband and I are talking about what we're going to do for dinner, and we're going to do takeout. And he said, how about Five Guys? And no joke, burgers and French fries and champagne has to be one of the all-time classic pairings.
It's fantastic. We did a class, Carol, I think it was right before the outbreak. Maybe it might have been this time last year where we actually got Popeye's chicken. We did Popeye's chicken, potato chips, popcorn, and it is amazing. If you've never tried fries with champagne or potato chips, it's outstanding. Or even fried chicken. If you get some fried chicken with champagne, it's outstanding.
Birds and bubbles, it's a thing. So all right, I'm just gonna jump in talking about Domaine Laurent-Perrier. So this, as a winery, is just so special. So they're one of the larger wineries in Champagne, but they certainly don't feel that way, and they certainly don't present themselves that way. And we'll kind of get into why that is a little bit later. But starting basically with the geography. So Laurent-Perrier, their main chateau is in Tours-sur-Marne, which is right outside of Epernay. So if you're thinking about Champagne and its geography, they really have two major cities. So it's Reims, looks like Reims. Reims is the correct pronunciation. They always say Reims rhymes with France if you accentuate the accent as hard as you can. And then there's Epernay as well. And that's the second major city there where the Rue de Champagne is. So kind of like picture a fraternity row of champagne houses is the best way I can describe that. But they're very cool because they're a little bit outside both cities, and they very much have their own compound. So you can see on the map here, these are their buildings. It's a gated chateau. They unfortunately do not accept public tours. It would be amazing if they did. But keeping that sort of privacy is how they're able to preserve the feeling that they get. I don't know if anybody else has been to Champagne or visited some of the larger houses. You almost feel like you're on a conveyor belt in Disneyland, just kind of getting moved through the different rooms. Laurent-Perrier is not at all like that. So let's get into some of the history and why this family is so special. So in 1812, the chateau was founded, and it was founded very differently. So back then, typically it was either royal affiliations or extremely wealthy merchant families were starting and founding champagne houses. Alphonse Pierlot was a barrel cooper. He just happened to have some connections to some grape growers in the area. He was able to start the foundation of what became a very strong relationship between the champagne house and their growers. And then unfortunately, he had some family issues, and he didn't have any kids. So in another very strange thing that you don't typically see in Champagne, he willed the entire estate to his cellar master. So the gentleman who was making his champagne at that time on a fairly small scale, he said, here you go, in his will, and he handed it off to Eugene Laurent, which is where we get the Laurent part of Laurent-Perrier. Eugene died in a cellar accident. He was crushed, which not to get too graphic, but his widow, Mathilde Laurent-Perrier, her family name being Perrier, took over the house, and she really started to push their production to be a little bit larger. She continued to extend the relationships they had with more and more growers and different plots of land across Champagne. In Champagne, different villages are designated to different grapes. So the three main grapes being Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir. There are 257 crus in Champagne, so different plots of land designated to legally grow grapes that can be sold to champagne houses. Only 44 of them are Premier Cru, so slightly higher than the average, and only 17 of those are Grand Cru. And Cru, what was it?
No, I said, wow.
Yeah, it's startling how selective they have to be, and I think that's such an important fact to mention early on in this presentation. Because we'll start talking about the connections that they have, and it's really just by going out and meeting people and sitting in their living rooms and building these personal relationships that Laurent-Perrier built what they had. Because if, like I said, they didn't start with any real strong family money. So after Mathilde was leading Laurent-Perrier, she ended up needing to sell it. And they sold it to the Marie-Louise Lançon. So Lançon, very famous name in Champagne. They do have some royal affiliations, and then they also, of course, have the Lançon Champagne name. She bought it to give to her sons because she was not on the direct descendant line to drive production beyond Lançon. So her sons were never really going to get a piece of that pie. So she went out and she purchased Laurent-Perrier, which at the time was still quite a small chateau. And then she passed it on to her sons. And one of her sons was Bernard de Nonacourt. And he's really where we start to get the identity of Laurent-Perrier. So like Chris said, I went over there last year during the harvest, and you hear anybody mention Bernard's name and they get misty. He was 6'7", so they called him Le Grand Bernard. And he was involved in every single aspect of the business. So he had a cellar marketer, a cellar manager, he had a marketing manager. He was heavily involved in both sides. He came up with some of the key concepts that ended up being really the identity of Laurent-Perrier. So he was the one who pushed for their tête de cuvée, which is called Le Grand Siècle. We'll touch on that a little bit later. He was the one who pushed for them to reintroduce rosé champagne in 1968. And while rosé champagne was started by Veuve Clicquot, by the widow Clicquot, it was sort of dropped off the map for about 100 years. It just went out of fashion. And he said, hey, everybody's producing champagne in roughly the same style. We should really push to bring back this whole other color. You know, people are going to see it on their shelf. They're going to recognize that it's different. And he got a lot of flack for that. People said rosé champagne does not sell outside of Champagne. And he did the same thing with stainless steel fermentation, which sounds technical, but basically what it means is in their winemaking process, the wines themselves never see wooden barrels. So they don't age in them, they don't ferment in them. Everything on the property is stainless steel. And when they started doing that in the 60s, everybody in Champagne said they were crazy. Your champagnes are going to be too acidic. They're going to be too sharp. You're never going to find footing in the market. And he said, I want to make a champagne that's crisp and clean, but still has all of the toasted brioche and baking spice and special quality that Champagne has against any other sparkling wine from any region. And he did it successfully. And we'll get into, when we talk about the Brut, why it's so successful and rich and deep, even though they're not leaning on barrels to do so. Another thing they did, which is kind of cool, is in 1981, they reintroduced non-dosage champagne. So dosage is when you're making champagne after it's done its second fermentation in the bottle. So it's got all its bubbles. Slowly they riddle it. So they lean it at an angle and move it slightly every day. So all the yeast cells fall to the neck. They take those out, and of course they lose a little bit of liquid. They don't want the bottle to look less full, and they also want to soften the wine a bit. So they add a liquid back in that's a little bit of champagne and a little bit of cane sugar, and that's called a dosage. So it's a dose of sugar. Almost every champagne has that, with the exception of zero dosage. So what you get is a much sharper, brighter, cleaner champagne. They are very much in style now, which is pretty cool, that they were 40 years ahead of their time. Because I get asked for zero dosage champagnes all the time. People also call it diet champagne, which I don't really love. But the concept is there, you know, cleaner, brighter, sharper. So they brought that back in the 1980s. In the late 80s, they purchased Salon. If you're a champagne geek, that will mean a lot to you. They are just an epic house. And then right around the year 2000, they became a publicly traded company, which is fascinating because many champagne houses are, but they still retain the majority ownership and all of the voting rights, or the majority voting rights. So it's very much a family-run house. Some of the larger champagne houses are also owned by, you know, larger luxury good conglomerates, and they vote and make decisions very differently. It's a lot more business than it is artistry. Laurent-Perrier, it's 100% about the family and the way that they're presenting their product in a really authentic and personal way. And then regrettably in 2005, Bernard passed away. It was bittersweet because his two daughters took over, and they're now the largest female-controlled champagne house in the world, which I think is very cool and innovative and totally on brand for a house that just does what it wants to do and feels that its gut instincts are right, and they have been for the past 50 years. So they're a lot of fun to watch evolve just as much as they are fun to enjoy the legacy that they really lean into. So that's the history portion. Now let's talk about kind of in a more modern way, how they produce these wines. So only 10% of the grapes that they're getting are from land that they own. The rest is all of those relationships that we talked about that started in 1812 with the first ownership. And they have over 1,200 independent growers, all rated consistently excellent from, for the most part, Premier and Grand Cru. So they're really only pulling from about 20% of what's available out there. And that kind of brings me into Échelle des Crus. So those 257 plots of land, in a very French way, are oversaw by the French government and given designations of basically how expensive the fruit is. And that directly correlates to the quality. So it's 80 to 100, 100 being the highest, 80 being the lowest. And they work with 91% fruit on the Échelle des Crus scale, which is pretty amazing and selective and expensive. But they accept nothing less. They've never dropped below 90 on any bottling, and 91 is now the standard for their brut. Other champagne houses do not release the information of where they stand on the Échelle des Crus.
And why is that?
For all the reasons you would expect.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that question before you got into that. It was all the big houses, all the big commercial houses. How does Laurent-Perrier compare to them? I mean, in terms of like output, production, and everything.
So they are technically in production. They hover right between 5th and 6th largest, which I think is shocking. So when I went there, I met with a very lovely gentleman to start the tour. So when you go, the tour is the CEO of hospitality, which I think is just fabulous. And he'd asked where we'd visited the past few days, and I kind of rattled off, the big guys. And he said, "Oh, mademoiselle, we are one of the big guys. You would just never know it."
Right.
And I think that's really cool. They've done it in a way with so much integrity that you don't even realize you're in this large scale production. That's another reason I just have the utmost fandom for this brand. It's large, it's successful, it's so authentic. And there's real people involved, which is nice.
So with all that volume, they're still able to maintain that percentage of high quality grapes that they're producing from all these different plots that they're buying from, correct?
Yeah, and they I was talking to the gentleman who was running it, and he said even in years where our producers can't produce the fruit to the quality that we need it, we will still pay them the same price we paid them the previous vintage.
Wow.
Because it's not always a business transaction, it's a relationship. And I promise you the larger houses don't do that.
No.
Especially when there's 257 plots they can shop.
Right. That's incredible. It's incredible that they maintain this standard of quality while keeping their position as one of the top producers in Champagne. And like you said, you would never know, because when everybody talks about Champagne, you hear all the big names come out. And then like yourself, when you come in with something like this, it's like, where has this been all my life? Why are we not drinking more of this? Why isn't this at the forefront of everybody's, selection to purchase? I mean, and as everybody, I'm hoping everybody's sampling something right now. I hope you're tasting the quality in this glass, taking the time to really appreciate everything Jen's explaining to you right now, because it's quality is in that bottle, and the flavor, the nuances really come out of that. And that's just pure craftsmanship in this wine.
And remember, they're doing that all without wood. So they're not using anything to flavor correct. It's all about the quality of fruit and then the precision winemaking, which I think is just amazing.
Right.
So a little bit on all of those vineyards that they work with, they're heavily involved in trying to improve the farming with everybody that they work with. And being a resource and being a financial resource, they want to make sure that everybody is happy in their operation, that the end product is perfect. And so for that reason, they sustainably grow. So they're sustainable winemaking. in every single vineyard that they purchase from, so all 1,200 different independent growers and about 50 different vineyards. The head of their vineyard management, Emmanuel Robinet, he spent 19 years at the CIVC. So that's the commission that oversees the quality of champagne and protects the name champagne from a French government standard. So there's no wiggle room with this man. It has to be perfect because he's been a government official overseeing perfection for 20 years. And he's now full-time employed by Laurent-Perrier. And he made a couple big pushes. So they're certified sustainable by 2 different programs. They think it's important not just to align yourself with one certifying body, it's important to show range. There's a few wineries in the world that have that same belief. It's sort of just compiling multiple resources to really prove that what you're doing is of note. And they never, ever, ever use insecticides. They use this really funky pheromone that basically prevents all of the pests from mating and they all die off. There's a few places that use that, but it's a very cool, somewhat new technology. And then they get a little bit deeper into environmental care. So everything's gravity flow, meaning they don't waste electricity on using pumps to move things uphill. They build structures very intentionally to flow one way. They have their own water treatment plant. Almost all of the light, if you go visit them, is natural, which is really fascinating because there are some really dark rooms and they just won't turn the lights on. They have like 2 or 3 windows that just kind of funnel in some dark light. And everything they use is zero waste. So they take all their leaves and their leftover bits from crushing the grapes and the skins and the stems, and they actually sell them off to a lot of cosmetics companies. A lot of natural cosmetic companies look for a compound called resveratrol, which is natural in grapes. It's also an anti-aging ingredient. So they're really always trying to find ways to do better, be better, and kind of complete the circle of production where there's no waste. And I think that's really cool. So this is a great slide because it has pictures from the winery. So I'm going to direct your attention to the top right picture. So those are all their steel tanks. And if you look down one, those are their steel fermentation tanks. And then underneath that are their presses and some more fermentation tanks. This is all relatively new. So they put this in the last 15 years in this drive to have new, clean everything. These production methods, they're absolutely sterile. Which might not sound very romantic, but it allows them to intervene so much less in their wines when they know the machinery and the atmosphere they're producing it with are absolutely immaculate. And then the larger picture at the bottom on the left is super cool. So this is a very specific room designated to producing their tête de cuvée, or their top wine, called Le Grand Siècle. And every single one of those different vats is 100% filled with a different Grand Cru wine. So in that wine, they're only using Grand Cru wines. I think they have 16 out of the 17. And you walk down that aisle and there's little plaques in front of each that have the name of the Grand Cru. And you feel like you're walking by like a bunch of superstars on your way to this tasting room in the back, where Michel Fauconnet, their current winemaker, it's like a supervillain's lair. He's got all these glasses lined up, these like perfect, beautiful chillers, and then this long slate piece. And that's where he goes privately in absolute silence and tastes through all the wines before he blends them. And just to stand in there is very cool, and you feel like you're in the presence of something really special. And to design that whole room, they actually had a hotel designer look at the bottle that the Grand Siècle is in and then design the entire structure off of that bottle, which is just a really cool piece kind of from an architecture standpoint. And then to be a little bit less hyper modern, these are their cellars. So if you ever have the joy of visiting Champagne, you'll see a lot of rooms that look like this. That sort of funky dust is mold on that first picture, top middle. Mold is super important to filtering air, making sure that the moisture around the corks is correct, nothing's drying out. It looks gross, but it's super beneficial. And then the gentleman to the right of that is riddling. So that's that process I mentioned where you lean the bottles a certain way, turn them a little bit every day, and piece by piece, the lees sort of fall down, or the dead yeast cells lees fall down to the neck of the bottle. And then what they do to remove them is actually quick freeze the neck of the bottle and break it. And they remove the puck, and then they're able to put it in a new bottle and seal it. And then this little picture over at the bottom of the 5 bottles on the bottom right, they collected some bottles from 1700s of original champagne bottles, and they have them on display in their little museum. And that's what the rosé bottle is based off of. So that's a cool little piece of history on their property. And then in the winery, so this is just a quick shot of, they have a little lab in there. Like I said, they're a perfect intersection of romance and science because they're just hell-bent on not having any faults in the wine, no TCA involved in the cork. The level of care is amazing. This is a funny little slide. So no barrels ever. They don't use the bottom picture, which is a concrete fermentation tank. Everything is stainless. That's a big push they made in the last 15 years. And this is one of my favorite slides. And Chris, definitely chime in, because I just think this is the most fascinating graphic of all the champagnes that you would kind of know on a scale of most reductive protective, meaning least contact with oxygen, basically least amount of change in the bottle, to the absolute most where they've had a chance to change and deepen. And all of this comes down to personal taste. But I think it's really interesting because it shows you exactly why everybody thought Bernard's and Nonacourt was crazy, because it is so different. But also why they're so successful now. If you like this style, it's awesome to see it visually. It's just a super cool infographic.
Yeah, especially compared to all the big houses or the bigger houses.
I'm always surprised where Vouv is on this.
Yeah.
All that sugar.
All that sugar.
So this is Michel Fauconnet. So he's been their winemaker since 2004, but he started in the 70s as what they call a cellar rat. So basically he would do anything they would tell him, you know, clean the mold off of this section, feed the mold on this section, this bottle broke, clean it up, move these cases. And he did that for so long and kind of gained the favor of the previous chef de cave or cellar master, Alain Perèyre, and worked his way up. And his passion is tremendous. And his ability to blend the wines and keep the house style is what a great chef de cave does. So if you're unfamiliar with why this job is so unbelievable, with non-vintage champagnes, which is what we're tasting tonight, ideally they are identical every single time you go to Wine 101 and purchase one. But they're of course not all made in the same year or at the same time. So it's really at the skill of the chef de cave to taste what it is now, all of the wines that come in on that vintage, ferment them differently, taste the individual batches, then blend them back together with the inclusion of some older wine, and ideally produce an absolutely identical product to what he tasted originally and what the house style is. And that is an unbelievable skill. It's mind-blowing. what these gentlemen and ladies are capable of. So I think it's cool to give a shout out to Michel Fauconnet, because he is the reason the wine in your glass tastes so good. And a very reclusive man. He doesn't do interviews. He really doesn't talk to anyone, but he is very well known for what he is able to do.
There's a lot of detail going into creating. I mean, essentially, this is like their house brand, correct? The Brut.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Any non-vintage. I mean, it's not just your house blend of like your daily roast coffee going into a coffee shop, your regular house blend. I mean, this takes a lot of skill to keep producing this house style year after year, with multiple vintages being blended into it. Just like you said, with this gentleman here, that's a skill in itself. So even at this price point, you would think this would be more money, just the amount of detail that goes into creating this. This isn't from a single vintage. Just to recreate this style year after production, no?
Which is fascinating, because vintages, of course, are always more expensive, but arguably easier to make. So the non-vintage of any champagne house is the absolute unsung hero, because they're the ones that the chef de cave is spending the most time perfecting, which I think is just fascinating. So a little bit of hits on just why the house style is the way it is. So they go through 100% malolactic fermentation. If you're unfamiliar, that's when you introduce bacteria, basically, that converts citric acid, which is the acid from a lemon, into maloacid, which is the acid you would have in milk. So it basically rounds it out, takes it from being overly tart and adds complexity. So where you're not using wood to add roundness or vanilla flavors or baking spice, a process like that is very important. To give you sort of a touchstone, California Chardonnay goes through malic once or twice and has oak on it. That's how you basically build body in a wine, and that's one of the largest body wines I can think of, where you really can taste that process. And then pressing and vinification by crew, we touched on that a little bit, but when they harvest the grapes, they don't then just throw them all in one bin. They sort them out by exactly where they came from and make them into wine only in that batch, and then after that blend. So it's a lot more precise. There's a lot more control. They know what every single one of those plots of land translates into as a wine, and how they can all interact in the eventual blend. So we're going to skip these guys because we don't have them. But I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute, and then I'm going to take the screen share down so we can all drink this together and kind of see everybody's reactions. So this is the La Cuvée, the Brut. 55 Chardonnay, 35 Pinot, 10 Meunier. And then the reserve wines, those are previous year wines. So like I mentioned, when you're putting that blend together, you couldn't achieve the depth with only this vintage. It would also be a vintage champagne. They're always holding back some wine from previous years to blend back in. And then the next statistic, after all we've talked about, 94% of the wine in this is coming from Premier Cru. Which is pretty amazing. It says 100 individual designations. It's 257, which is just amazing. And then when they're making the wine, they let the first 225 liters run off when they're pressing it, just to make sure that they're really getting to the heart of that pressed juice and the cleanest, best quality juice, which is also expensive and, takes away from how much volume they could produce. And then they're aging it for 4 years in their cellar. So that's where, again, with this absence of wood and using steel, they're using things like malolactic fermentation and time in the bottle to develop more complexity and change the wine for the better. So I'm going to, if I can, take this screen share down. I'm hoping it works.
Yep, you're back. There you are.
Cheers to everybody who's drinking the Brut.
How many people have the Brut in their glass right now? I mean, I'm not drinking this ice cold, so I get a little more of the complexity and the flavors out of it, but just like Jen's describing, there's a lot more body to this wine. There's a lot of roundness to it, a lot of richness to it. So even when you smell it on the nose, you get that brioche, that fresh baked brioche, that yeasty note on it. Again, this is why we love bringing people like Jen onto the program with us. It's showcasing these producers that you normally wouldn't gravitate towards. So once we get underneath that label, underneath, of what they are, and Jen digs deep into it. I mean, she spent time there. It's fascinating that they're able to produce this quality of wine at the highest standards there are consistently and come out with a product like this. Yet, I don't know, what is it? They don't have the marketing dollars behind it to push this thing like that.
It's fascinating. It's
fascinating. I think it's fascinating that you find individuals like yourself find these producers, and that's why we love our job and showcase this. There's so many alternatives out there. People just don't realize the intricacies that go into making something so detailed and layered and flavored as this. And I just love wine like this. I love sharing wine with people like you all like this. This is fascinating to bring these small producers here and introduce you all to them. And to hear stories like Jen has these connections with these people. It's fascinating.
And internationally, this is a huge brand. So
okay.
if you were to go to Europe or Asia, you would see it much more prevalently than you would see, say, Heidsieck or, Veuve and Moet are their own beast. But the American market is just underdeveloped for this brand. And it was, no offense to us, we were a little bit of an afterthought for them. And now they're somewhat circling back as the world gets smaller every day. But it's fun to discover them because there's so much to discover here if it's your first time having them, which just makes it such a delight. So I'm going to jump back on the screen sharing. Wish me luck. And we'll move into the next wine.
And I just put it in the comment box. Chime in. Tell us what you're tasting. Tell us what you're experiencing. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different flavor profile, different palate. Again, depends on what you're eating with this and what you're pairing with this. Just chime in there. Tell us what's going on with your palate. Again, I sent home a map of the Champagne region, and there's 5 zones within that. Each zone grows something specifically geared towards their terroir. It's not like everybody grows the same thing and they're pulling from, it's just pick of the litter. We'll get Chardonnay from here. We'll get it from here. It's not like grocery shopping out there. Every zone out there is specifically, their terroir is specifically designed to grow something really well. And when you start going through it to really break down, and when you dig down deep into the vineyards and where they're pulling from, what vineyards, then you get to understand all that, and you create that flavor profile. Again, I always tell people to harken back to that. Find out where these grapes are grown, find out the region and everything else. You may like other stuff around there. So when we talk about Worcester Street pizza, New Haven style pizza, yeah, it's a style created from that region. And I relate that to everything else in wine. If you like something from that region, seek out other things around that area and see what you like. Create your own flavor profile based on that region. You may find other things that really please your palate.
All right, so I'm just gonna give you a little bit of background on the rosé. For those lucky few who purchased this as an add-on to your package, I hope you enjoy it. It is very much considered at this point the flagship of the winery. And for those of you who didn't pick it up this time around, it is available and always delicious and very, very unique. So I'm going to get into some of the attributes that make this very different from other rosé champagnes. So first off, it's 100% Pinot Noir. There's no blending going on in this. 100% of the Pinot Noir that they're selecting is from Grand Cru designations, which is just, at this price point, it's not an inexpensive wine, but the value that this wine presents, given the raw materials that they're pulling together, is astonishing. And then they're aging it for 5 years. The legal requirement is 3. But what they're doing that's really cool, I'm going to jump into the next slide, is they have a proprietary maceration process. So they go out, they harvest all of the Pinot Noir grapes. And in Champagne, the French government actually gives you a harvest date. So you are quite literally mailed or now emailed a date and they say, this is when you can go pick your grapes. We've looked at all the weather patterns. This is your day. So usually when you're selecting from 10 different designations, they'll be harvesting for about a week, depending on how the weather falls. But they scoop up those grapes and then they run as fast as they can over to these stations where they destem the grapes. So stems on a grape, if you include them in the pressing, will bring forth a lot more tannin and a lot more texture to your wine. While this is a very textured wine, all of the texture you're getting is going to be from the grape skins. They didn't want any of the possible bitterness that you can pull from a stem involved. It's a more laborious process to destem. So they destem all the fruit. And then instead of pressing it and pulling the juice, they cold soak it for 48 to 72 hours. Moving the wine over itself, or not the wine at that point, but the juice over itself every 8 hours to make sure that it's not stagnant or fermenting. Because unlike other methods of producing rosé or rosé champagne, they don't want the fermentation to start at this point, and that's very unique. Typically, you would cold soak and press, and then in the same vat start a fermentation. It's a very long time to wait 2 to 3 days before fermentation starts. But what they're doing at that point is they're pulling so much texture and color and flavor from those skins. And then they're starting the primary fermentation and then doing a malolactic conversion after. So it takes 2 days longer than a typical champagne would to start the process. And then after that, it's treated the same way. What was that? I heard somebody.
You're good.
So what you get, if anybody who's enjoying it, it's a very dark colored rosé. I'm gonna bring the camera back down so I can see anybody who's enjoying the rosé. Pardon me. Let's see.
If you have the rosé in your glass, hold it up. There you go.
Here's the
Yeah,
rosé.
nice dark color. Yeah.
It is one of my favorites of all time. It's just delicious.
Yeah.
Did you guys like it? You can give a thumbs up or a comment.
We had the rosé last year. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Hi, does anyone else find sorry, it's Celeste. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Celeste. How are you?
Thank you, Jen. Hi, okay. Does anyone else find the rosé a little flatter than the other? And is that typical?
So I would agree with you. So when we're talking about the bubbles and the sort of tenacity, call it the mousse. So there's 2 reasons the mousse could be a little bit different. So one, it is a little bit softer on this wine overall. Based off the way that you produce a wine or what the blend is, especially when it's involved with multiple grapes, you can have a much tougher mousse. So more bubbles, more vivacious. This is 100% Pinot Noir, so it's a little bit softer. But the more pressing reason, your Brut is in a half bottle and your Rosé is in a 750. And the half bottles are typically under a lot more pressure just by the nature of the sizing of the bottle. So you're going to see the most difference between these two right now.
Thank you.
Format. But great question. Awesome. Well, I'm going to zip right along. I hope you guys are enjoying the rosé, but I know we got to get to the demi-sec as well.
No,
Yeah, I question everything. I mean, even when you're tasting something, if you think something's off or, you're just unsure of something. I tasted something last week and I just don't have the experience in that realm of Italian wine. Somebody wanted my criticism of it. I'm like, I can't. It's just, I don't have enough experience with this. Let me know, this is what it tastes like. This is what I'm experiencing. And as a wine consumer, like everybody, here, all of us, question it, ask questions. There's somebody that has an answer for you, like Jen, that has the experience of tasting multiple, different styles of that rosé from champagne or the wine I had, I've called Jen on several occasions and just said, hey, have you ever had this? What should I expect out of this? It's always good to get well-rounded, answers for something you really want to truly understand. So ask away. Even if you think it's wrong, just ask away. Never wrong. That's why we try to encourage people, put it in the chat box or chime in like Celeste did. Ask away. You're not wrong. And it's somebody else is too bashful to even say that. Don't be. Really seek out these answers.
And tasting is so subjective anyway.
Absolutely.
There are wines out there that critically are so embraced, and I have friends in the industry who just love them, and I can't wrap my tongue around it for better sense of the word. It doesn't make sense to my palate, and my goal is always to get there, keep drinking it till I like it. But it's so much fun to talk about because it's so different to everybody. We're not ones and zeros here. There's just a range of different experiences.
I had this exact conversation with somebody yesterday in relation to Gewürztraminer, and he was very passionate about it. I'm like, I just can't get behind it. I said, I'm not knocking the grape or the style. It's just, it's not my thing. And there's something out there for everybody. And, to come in contact with these people that are super passionate about a specific thing, it's so intriguing to just talk to them and see why they love it so much. And still, as much as this guy was just fawning over, I'm like, I can't get behind it. I said, I'm not knocking it, but it's just a grape and a wine style I just can't get behind. And we've tried them. You could sit there and say, yeah, this is a really great style, but a great producer, but it's just like I still can't get behind it. There's no convincing me about it.
Totally. So I'm going to jump into the demi-sec, and Chris and I were saying right before this call, always so excited to have people try a demi-sec, because you just don't see it on the shelf that frequently. It's one of their smaller produced wines. We're actually sold out of it currently. So you guys scooped up the last couple cases. But I think everybody's always so impressed that it's more palatable than they think it's going to be. I know a lot of people, myself included, kind of bristle up a little bit when we hear sweet. But it's clean and the acid matches, and that's all that matters. It's still super beautiful, super elegant and elevated. The sugar reads as more body, which I think is just awesome, especially in this wine where they're handling it so expertly. So if you'll notice, the Chardonnay percentage is a little bit lower. Pinot Noir and Meunier are a little bit higher. 20% reserve wines on these, because as you age reserve wine that also happens to have a high dosage, you're going to get some really intense characteristics coming through, and they still want to keep it clean. So they're working with 55 crus, 94% Premier Cru, super high quality, 3 years aging. And again, they're not doing 4 or 5 because of that sugar. They don't want the wine to start to get nutty or have more tertiary characteristics. They want it to read as floral and clean and light citrus driven. I always get almost like a little bit of lily in this wine in a really, really nice way. And then if you'll notice, 40 grams of sugar. They're not playing around with the dosage on this.
No, not at all.
But it doesn't feel heavy. And that's actually the last slide. I'm going to flip it over so that we can all talk. And I get so excited to hear people's response to this wine. So I would really, really love to hear it.
Even the color on this, I mean, when you go back to that chart, talk about oxidative values and everything, I mean, this is extremely darker than the Brut. So chime in, everybody. What are you tasting? What are you smelling? What are you experiencing? I feel more
no
weight on.
bubbles in this one, or is that just us? There's no bubbles in this.
Yeah, it's very light on the bubbles.
Okay.
Yep. So the mousse is going to be a lot lighter because the wine itself is heavier. It's also half bottles. So it's strong out the front, and then it does dissipate a little bit faster. You're also using a coupe, so you're going to lose the most the fastest, but they are beautiful glass.
Right. What's your preferred glass for pouring champagne in?
Typically, I use a standard white wine glass.
Yeah, okay.
This was one of the glasses I got at Laurent-Perrier, so I felt like it was kind of nice to use that. But for me, standard white wine glass, unless I'm drinking something that's a super splurge, like if I was drinking Le Grand Siècle, I would probably put it in a full burgundy balloon because I would want to just get as much of that bouquet as possible.
You're seeing a lot of restaurants transition to the coupes. You mentioned the coupes before. You're seeing a lot of restaurants transition into that and steering away from like your traditional flute. I mean, I got these flutes last year. I just like drinking them out of that, but aside from that, I would drink it out of a small white wine glass. I know there's a couple places I go to, they pour it out of coupes. It's still fun. Again, you get a lot of aromatics out of it. You know, August is one of them. Most of the sparkling wines he pours out of coupes.
Coupes are super fun, and I think they have such a romantic notion to them. I think they get slammed a little bit technically because you don't get the same funneling of the aromatics. There's not glass there for the smells of it all to kind of congregate before they hit your nose. The space there is lost.
Right.
But for celebrations, I still love coupes because they're just fun and cool, and you feel like you're in The Great Gatsby. And that's what champagne's about. Champagne is just for fun.
Yeah, should be.
They'll be the first ones to tell you that in Champagne.
Yeah. And even after demi-sec, I mean, this is on the far right of the spectrum on the sweetness scale. I mean, we start all the way on the left with Brut Natural. I mean, Brut is kind of in the middle. We consider kind of in the middle, but demi-sec falls all the way on the right. Even after this, it gets even sweeter. True?
Yes. So there is Du Style, which is very, very sweet. Most houses don't produce one. It's interesting. So in the days of, you know, Marie Antoinette and the French court, sweet, sweet, sweet champagne was everything. It wasn't until Perrier-Jouet produced a wine that was on the drier side that I think it was 12 grams of sugar in their dosage, which is fairly high for a Brut style. People said it was brutal when they tasted it, and that's actually where we got that term Brut. It's the shorthand for brutal, which I think is
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Champagne history is wacky. And it's really just a handful of characters, which is kind of fun.
This demi-sec
Mhm.
supposed to be like a dessert wine?
So the fun thing about sweet wines is you can do a lot more with them than you think. So especially with really pungent cheeses like blue cheese, I have a hard time eating blue cheese unless I have something sweet with it, like a jam or a sweeter wine. But you can also do shellfish with sweeter wines, especially crab, because it's got such a big, not strange, but very distinct flavor profile. Wines like this are really fun. So if you ever get like a raw bar shellfish tower, wines like this, you wouldn't think it, are a lot of fun to work with, to kind of taste against. And Chris, I don't know if you have any recommendations.
I mean, that was good. You said blue cheese. Blue cheese is such a pain in the rear end to pair with. Usually go with port, sauterne. This is a great alternative. I'm glad you brought that up because that wasn't even my wheelhouse. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I don't play in this sandbox of champagne. I never get into demi-sec, which was great that Jen chose to showcase this tonight, you know, and for us to sit here and talk about what can we pair with this, and to bring up blue cheese, absolutely. I would do blue cheese with this every day, as opposed to something heavy like sauternes and port. Again, this is weighty, but not as weighty as those two fortified wines. And there's not many things that do pair well with blue cheese, but this works really good.
So Chris and Jen, okay, this tastes pretty earthy, dare I say basementy to me. Does it have that style to you, or that flavor to you? It actually tastes a little basement-like to me.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And a little Vinsanto-ish.
I'm getting more Vinsanto than I am basement. No, that you brought up Vinsanto, I'm getting more of that.
Yeah. But I'm getting a
basement.
real down in the dirt, moldy taste on this one. Yeah.
No, I'm getting like wet concrete, wet floor,
Okay, yeah,
like, sidewalk wet,
yeah.
but not like musty anything, at least in my bottle.
But
Again,
if
there might be bottle variation with everybody's.
Yeah,
But definitely that Vinsanto kind of extraction, that kind of,
yeah.
residual, you get that residual on your palate. I feel it, people will call me crazy, but I feel it on the front of my teeth a lot. On
Yeah.
something this rich,
Yeah.
it
So
coats
now
the
I
front of
want
my
to try
teeth.
it with that blue cheese though.
What's that?
Now I want to try it with the blue cheese.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a blue cheese out there called Bleu d'Auvergne, and they soak it in brandy. It's excuse me, in sauternes. It is absolutely phenomenal. But to take a regular standard blue cheese, even something very basic like Maytag Blue, and introduce something like this to it, it almost lifts up that blue cheese where it's like a standard blue cheese. It makes it so much more better.
I've never had a champagne like this. Yeah.
So that's the
Cool.
purpose of showing
Yeah.
showing this style to people. It's now and everybody's different. So even with the residual sugar, how much? What is this? Like 12 to 16% to be considered demi-sec?
Yes.
Excuse me, 12 to 16
no,
grams.
it's 15 and up, I think.
Yeah, 15. Okay, but every producer has some kind of leeway that's just catered to their own style. So I mean, you have a basic parameter of what they give you, but one person's brute to another is very different. They're not all going to be that same standard.
Hey, Jen, will this wine age like a Sauterne does? Will it develop and does it have a lot of cellar time to it, or is it pretty much a sort of a finished and always drink now young wine?
That's a great question, because demi-secs are going to change more than anything else in the bottle, which is the fun of them. It's a little bit funny in that they're a non-vintage style. So in a lot of ways, if you go to your liquor store, maybe it's been sitting there for a month and you pick it up and it's fresh. Maybe it's been there a year and it's going to be a slightly different experience. Like I said, demi-secs are always one of the smaller production items, but they're a really cool way to see the funkier, edgier side of a house. It sounds weird to say that their sweeter wines are going to be edgier, but I think from this conversation, we've all learned sweet and fruit are, do not have to go hand in hand. You can have funk and sugar and body and tertiary characteristics and change and still be a technically sweet wine. And I think that's a lot of fun to explore. Sweet wine does not have to mean it only goes with fresh fruit and cream and pound cake. It can be strange in the best way.
Right.
So I would never be afraid to pick up a demi-sec just to see what it's like.
So then maybe a more general question too on non-vintage. So how do you, if you're going to try and get non-vintage or cellar it or something, how do you manage, how do you sort of understand the date, the bottling date? Is there a way to tell the date so you know how old something is, so you can keep track of it on a non-vintage? And
So
maybe is there somewhere on the label that it says it, or do you have to know, or should you get it from direct source, or how do you do that?
So every bottling is a little bit different. Typically, they won't tell you exactly when it was bottled. There are some houses that do, or there are also some houses that have apps where you can scan the bottle itself, not just for demi-sec, but for everything that they do, because in today's age, it's getting more and more popular that the drinker wants to know more information about the production, the timeline, how long and where it's been until it was in that right moment at that shop. Laurent-Perrier doesn't do that. So your best bet would just to be ask Chris when it came in, and then he could always ask me and I could tell you the exact ship date. So it requires a little bit more old school legwork, but between the two of us, we could get you some pretty exact answers. And then so far as your own cellaring, I mean, everybody runs their collections differently. But with non-vintage, sticky dots are great. This is what I used to use to run the cellar that I did at Foxwoods. So the little colored tabs you buy at Staples, you just put the date on them, and we used to color code them for different years. But that's always my kind of personal recommendation for that kind of stuff. It's just easy.
Yeah, we have a couple comments. Tastes more like a vermouth. Somebody else said comment like Lillet, reminds them of Lillet.
I love Lillet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That-
it's fine.
The Dolan Blanche that you brought a couple weeks ago. I mean, it doesn't have the sweetness as this, but yeah, the body style of that.
And that's kind of a similar case. You've got your
Yeah.
dry white, that's your sweet white. Of course, that has wormwood and a angelica root and a few other things. But yeah, sugar, not always fruit, is like a catchphrase.
Right.
Chris, I got a question for you.
Go ahead. Where am I?
Greg or Tanya. So we were curious about the flavor of our demi-sec as well. And the cork for the demi-sec is the small one. And it
Yeah.
just slid right out.
Yeah, ours too.
No
You see it on
pop.
my screen. I got the same thing.
Okay. I didn't know if that meant it dried out or you got air in it or,
Yeah, I thought it was bad or something. It seemed weird.
it did seem weird. It was not what we expected, but
Yeah,
after hearing the description, maybe that's exactly what it's supposed to be.
correct. Right. No, same thing. When I pass it, Carol and I are texting back and forth. And even when you look at mine, I think everybody has the same thing. Same style of cork on it. But again, you're talking with something with more residual sugar in it. It's not gonna have the same aggressive bubble, correct, Jen? That
Yeah, so
you would be
the
used
liquid
to with a
itself is
brew.
more viscous. Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, it's more viscous. Doesn't quite borderline a still wine, but it started to creep into that territory. I mean, you get that little bit of pop in it.
Yeah,
But
we
very
had
different.
basically no bubbles at all. It was
Yeah.
totally flat. So curious. Thank you.
Have you had that experience, Jen, with some demi-secs that they borderline that almost still wine?
I've had a few where they start with the mousse and maybe 10 or so minutes open.
Yeah,
They
okay.
really relax.
Yep.
I've had that a lot with Chenin Blanc based
Yes.
Cremant too on the sweeter side.
Yep.
It's just something about the liquid doesn't hold the gas as effectively when it's as heavy as it is.
Yep.
But
That makes sense. Again, with the sugar that they're retaining in this style, the bubbles just can't hold up to it. It doesn't I'm assuming it doesn't generate that same kind of effervescence to it with that amount of sugar being attached to it.
Moscato can't really hold a bubble either.
No.
That's flat
No.
almost instantaneously. So
Yeah,
it's more about
right.
the weight of the actual liquid.
Yeah, okay, that makes more sense now. And I'm looking at my chart right now. I pull out my cheat sheets for all these things. So when you get to demi-sec, it's 32 to 50 grams per liter in that. It's compared to
Yeah,
something like
and
a
this is
brute.
40.
Which is, what's that?
And this is 40. So this is
And then right, and they're at the 40. Yeah, when you're talking about the brute that we had, the usual range is under 12 grams per liter. So when you start at the top, when you look at the spectrum of sweetness levels of wines, again, we said brut naturals all the way on the left, zero dosage. Then you go up to extra brut, and the terms, especially in retail, you probably did the same thing when you were on the restaurant side. When you start getting into extra brut, extra dry, it starts throwing everybody off, and you have to sit there and explain it. It's like, no, this has more fruit, and everybody says, no, I want it more dry. Well, you got to go this way. So it's extra brut, extra dry, sec, demi-sec, and doux. Doux being the sweetest. And how many of the houses actually produce a doux? And I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. My French is way off.
The Doux is correct.
Yeah, okay.
I can think of just a couple off the top
Right.
of my head. You just don't see them in the American market too frequently.
Yeah.
It's actually the UK market that looks for the Doux
Yes.
style more than anybody else.
Yeah. And
Uh-huh.
that's interesting because the UK is producing champagne quality sparkling wines, and they're all dry. They're not at that sweetness
Super
level.
dry.
Super dry. And it's like, wow. And they're known for drinking Chenin Blancs, aren't they? That's their preferred style of sparkling wine.
Yeah, so they're also the ones consuming a lot of the extra brutes or pardon me, zero dosage. So they're a nation of extremes. But historically, the British taste has dictated a lot of the decisions made in Champagne. Maybe not as much in the last 50 years, but certainly prior to that for the previous 150 years. There's always been connections between, the British monarchy and different champagne houses. Beauliger is a perfect example of that. If you go to Champagne, there's a lot of British people on holiday. There's a really interesting long-standing connection there, which is kind of cool.
So, again, with tonight, I mean, we're talking about Champagne, obviously, but this is called method champenois. The traditional method is the way this is created, where secondary fermentation is done in the bottle. Considering Champagne's price tag, I mean, there's just no way around it. Again, going into the holidays, everybody, and it's kind of, I don't want to say it's the generic term, but it's the term we all use for a sparkling wine, where you would come to a store or a restaurant and say, I want to drink champagne. And when you say, well, here's a champagne, it's $45, $50, $60. I want something at $12, $15. And that just doesn't exist in Champagne. But within the realm of method champenois, there's so many alternatives. And before the class, Jen and I were talking about, different things. Carol and I opened up a cava yesterday. Cava is one of them from Spain. And before COVID started, Jen was, we were happy to have Jen host a wine dinner where we featured cava. And even within the realm of cava, they are trying to escalate that. It is considered affordable champagne, but they are trying to escalate that so that it can compete with champagne. So you may see some of those cava houses actually start escalating their prices. But in Italy, you have Franciacorta, you have Trenta-Doc. In the United States, there are many champagne or champagne-like producers, method champenois producers here, and they come very. Stromsburg's one of them. I forget which houses you have domestically, Jen, that you carry.
Ooh, we don't carry too many big.
Okay.
Stiora's one.
Yeah.
But I'll put a plug out for someone else. Sea Smoke's sparkling wines
Really?
are unbelievable. I mean, they're not cheaper than champagne, but if you're geeking out on bubbles and you want to experience sort of what the US is doing that's very impressive domestically, Sea Smoke, super good.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Stromsburg and what they do.
Their rosés.
What's that?
Their rosé is
Their
killer.
rosé is fantastic. So if you're looking for something domestically, and people laugh, and I talked to this gentleman out on the West Coast, and he swears by it. The Corbel Brut Natural, which is all vintage. It's all Russian River juice. It's very close to champagne, except with the new vintage that came out, and I haven't yet to try it. But he said there's a lot of residual sugar in it. But swears by it, and people used to laugh at us when we first opened and we were promoting this, domestic wine that is considered a generic label. But when you start getting behind it and really understanding the wine and how it was made and where everything's coming from, you're like, wow, this is incredible. Right? It's you get past that generic label and you understand that this is something different than what they put out for the masses, and you could pick things out of your portfolio that do the same thing. And people have to understand that they need a money turner in order to do that stuff that they really want to play with, that they could age, that they could let sit around for a while and really develop. So that's what the Corbel, and that's an affordable luxury under $20, just like cava. So seek those things out. Again, you're looking on the label, it'll say method traditional, method champenois on there, and that's done in the champagne style, where secondary fermentation is done within the bottle, unlike Prosecco, which is done in big tanks. Again, we had this conversation before the class. It's like Prosecco never really knocks me out, and Jen was saying the same thing. Carol will say the same thing. It's like, we'll pour them, we'll drink them, and they're fun to drink, they're fun to play around with, but it's like they never blow our minds away with any complexity to it. But I'm sure there are some out there. It's like I'm waiting, we bring in some great ones, not to knock them, but if you asked any of us in store, we'll tell you exactly where our hearts are, with sparkling wine. But yeah, go ahead. You gonna say something? No. Yeah, even within France, outside of Champagne, you have, from Burgundy, you have from Alsace, they're creating that same style. So look on the label, Cremant d'Alsace, Cremant de Bourguignon. There's so many different producers out there, so many different ways to do this without spending champagne prices. So seek them out.
There's even some cool South American options at this point. Amalaya's doing a killer one that is
Really? Okay.
Argentinian white grape. Why can't I think of the name?
Tarantes?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Really?
So they're doing a Tarantes Riesling blend that
Wow.
is surprisingly delicious because they're growing it at such high elevation.
Yeah, Chris.
That's incredible. Before we close, everybody can unmute yourself. And, if you have any questions to shout out to Jen, if you're bashful about doing it, do it now. Unmute yourself, ask away. While Jen's here, she's a wealth of information for everybody, including us, including me. When I have other questions out of my realm, I always go to her. She's my go-to person most of the time. And she approaches it in a non-snobbery way where she won't laugh at me or ridicule me mercifully. Yeah. What's that county wine portfolio page? Oh, Sea Smoke. Yeah.
Sea Smoke.
Thank you. This has been so fun. I love the group.
The fruit
The
was great.
demi-sec was a little different, but it's interesting to sort of expand our horizons on champagne. Thank you.
We look forward to going home and checking them out since we've been drinking our dew.
That's your don't say.
No, it's good to experience all the different styles. Again, we don't pay so much attention to that end of the champagne spectrum. And you know what? You should experience it. Whether you like it or not, you develop your flavor profile and you sit back and you say, okay, I've had that. And you know what? It's maybe too sweet for your palate, or, whatever you came up with, whatever your palate's dictating to you, but at least you know that. And you can formulate your own opinion when you go out, or you can think of something you could pair it with that would actually balance that flavor profile out. So it's always good to try different things, even outside of your comfort level, which is the whole point of doing stuff like this. Really get out of your box, out of your comfort level, try different things, shock your palate, and understand what all this is all
Just get
about.
out of your box. We don't have a box.
People have a
Drink the
box.
same
Everybody
thing.
has a box.
We're all in
Is
boxes right
the
now.
Brut like a 750 ml? Is that really expensive, or how much is that? Wow.
No, it really isn't. I forget what the going rate is. I mean, we did it last year. We just brought in the half bottles this year just because it's a great half bottle to pour with people are always looking for half bottles this time of the year. The quality's there, the price is right, and the quality is there for a champagne half bottle.
Yeah, Brut's great.
Less expensive than its major competitors, typically by
Yeah,
a few.
Jen represents one of their major competitors, so she's using a
got
lot of
Agent
restraint.
Look.
What's that?
Agent Orange, I do represent them.
Yeah, but they're all out for the year, so we don't have to worry about it. They're done for the year. But yeah, I think it's around 45. It's under that 50 mark, definitely.
Yep, I see a 45 to 47 depending on what time of year with the patterns.
Really yummy. It's really good.
Yeah, it's a great brut champagne, for a non-vintage champagne, it's absolutely outstanding. And I can't say enough good about it. Even within Jen's portfolio, she comes through every year with great champagnes. And Carol and I sit back and it's like, my God, you got to cut it out with this. We don't have the budget for this. Just our
It's selfish.
personal
I
budget.
just want to drink champagne in the afternoon. So.
Yeah. The size is perfect for the class. That's when we talk champagne, there's no way around it. It's expensive. So to be able to do half bottles like this, and everybody gets a little try. Everybody gets a try, and nothing goes to waste. You're not putting a cap back on this for tomorrow. But again, somebody gave us a cap. One of our salespeople gave us an enclosure for a gift for the year, and the note was, in case you have any leftover sparkling wine. And Carol and I looked at each other and said, when do we ever have leftover sparkling wine? I don't think ever. Right? We've never had
Leftover wine? What? No. That's not
yeah, I know exactly. Regular still wine maybe, but sparkling wine, no. Sparkling wine goes away very fast. So any other questions for Jen while she's here? No, yeah, give her a round of applause. You can unmute yourselves if you like, give her a round of applause. You know,
Thank you. Nicely
Yay.
done.
yeah,
Thank
Carol
you.
and I really love having her do these things. It's a pleasure, and her experiences are just a wealth of knowledge for everybody. It's a great way to learn. You learn vicariously through, you know, people like Jen, through their adventures through life and through this wine world. And I think you really retain more that way, especially when they're so passionate about, you know, a specific thing. And it really came through, Jen. Thank you very much for doing this and suggesting this. This was great. Came at a perfect
Thanks for
time.
letting
Yeah. So everybody out there, hey, thank you all. I loved it with the Wesleyan cheese. Yeah, good. That's what, yeah,
So
we're trying to do
yummy.
different things. Yeah,
These
so I
two-
figured with the cranberries and everything to be festive, but to with the cheese, with the champagne would cut right through all that. I figured it would brighten it right up. But
Yeah.
no, good point. I totally forgot about that cheese.
Yeah, it was perfect. Thank you.
No, good. Thank you. So cheers to everybody out there. We're gonna wrap this up for the night.
Cheers.
I got dogs to go walk. Jen's got a little doggy to go walk. Carol's got, everybody here is pretty much has a dog to go walk. So cheers, everybody.
Oh, I know.
So here's to a better 2021. And from Carol, myself, and everybody, thank you very much for so much support that you guys give us. And we can't do this without you. So cheers.
Cheers.
Night.
Thanks to Wine 101. You guys
Thank
rule.
you. Have a great holiday.
Yes.
Nowadays.
Bye.
Next year.
Happy holidays.
To next year.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.